So when someone's wrongful act causes you harm, how on earth does the legal system figure out what that's worth? It's not about revenge, not at all. It's actually this really complex calculation, and it's all designed to just make things right. So let's dive in and see how courts actually turn something like suffering into a specific number, a RAND value.
Okay, let's imagine this. You're in a car accident, and it is totally not your fault. Your car, it's a wreck. The medical bills are just piling up, and you can't even go to work. You've clearly been harmed, right? So the big question the law has to answer is, how do we fix this? How do we make you whole again?
All right, so first things first, let's talk about the goal here. What's the point of all these legal remedies? It's really not about getting rich, and it's not about punishing the other person either. The mission is actually way more specific than that.
The main tool the law uses to do this is something called damages. And really, that's just a fancy legal term for a sum of money that a court orders one person to pay another. It's the remedy for what the law calls a delict, which, simply put, is just a wrongful act that causes harm.
Now this right here, this is the master key to the whole concept. The goal is to essentially financially turn back the clock. The money is meant to put the injured person, who we call the plaintiff in court, back in the exact position they would have been in if the accident had never, ever happened. So you see, it's all about restoration, not punishment.
Okay, so how do you actually calculate that? How does a court take a real-world event like a car crash and translate it into a specific RAND amount? Well, believe it or not, it follows a surprisingly logical process.
It's basically a two-step process. First, the court has to assess the harm. That means identifying every single negative thing that happened because of the incident. Then, step two, it quantifies that harm by sticking a price tag on it. And to do that, the law sorts the harm into two very distinct buckets.
So on one side, you've got your financial loss. The legal term is patrimonial loss, but really it's all the stuff you can see on a receipt or a bank statement. It's tangible. And on the other side, you have personal suffering or non-patrimonial harm. This is the stuff that's much harder to pin down. The pain, the trauma, the loss of just enjoying your life.
Let's go back to our car accident example. The financial losses, they're pretty straightforward, right? You've got your doctor's bills, the paychecks you missed while you were recovering, and maybe even the cost of physical therapy down the road. These are all hard numbers you can add up. But what about that other side? This is where it gets tricky. How do you put a price on the actual physical pain of the injury? Or the emotional shock from the crash? What about the fact that you can't play your favorite sport on the weekends anymore? This is where courts have to make a really tough judgment call, and they often do it by looking at what's been awarded in similar cases in the past.
Okay, so calculating past losses is one thing. But what about harm that's going to continue, way into the future? Well, this introduces a massive complication for the courts, and it's governed by a very, very strict rule.
It's called the once and for all rule, and it means exactly what it sounds like. You get one shot. That's it. You can't just go back to court 5 years later and say, hey, my injury is actually worse than we thought. I need more money. Nope. You have to claim for all of it, past, present, and future harm, all in one single go. And you can imagine this puts an immense amount of pressure on people and their lawyers to get that future calculation exactly right.
This basically forces the court to pull out a crystal ball and become a fortune teller. They have to predict future medical costs, future lost income, and they have to adjust all of that for inflation. And then they even have to account for these things called contingencies, which are basically the unpredictable ups and downs of life. Things like the chance you might have lost your job anyway, or maybe you recovered faster than anyone expected.
All right, so up to this point, we've been assuming the other person was 100% to blame. But let's be real, life is often a lot messier than that. So what happens when your own actions played a part in the harm you ended up suffering? Here comes the twist.
Let's jump back into our car accident scenario. The other driver ran a red light. Okay, clearly their fault. But what if you weren't wearing your seatbelt? And what if that's the reason your injuries were so bad? Well, this changes the entire calculation.
This whole idea is called contributory fault. Now, it doesn't just wipe out your claim completely, but it does reduce it. The court looks at what's just and equitable and figures out how much to lower the payout based on your actions. And here's the really key distinction to get. Your fault here contributed to the severity of your harm, not necessarily to causing the accident in the first place.
Okay, let's put a number on this to make it super clear. Let's say your total harm is calculated at a nice round R100,000. So, how does your partial fault affect what you actually get in your pocket? Well, it turns out courts have a couple of different ways to figure that out.
So,
Check this out. There are two main ways a court might handle this. First, there's the simple split. If you're found 30% at fault, they just reduce your R$100,000 award by that 30%. And boom, you get R$70,000. Easy enough. But there's a more nuanced way, called independent deviation. Here, the court looks at how much each person deviated from how a normal, reasonable person would act. So if your mistake was a 30% deviation and the other driver's was a 50% deviation, the court uses that ratio to split the blame. Which, as you can see, leads to a totally different payout. It just goes to show you that the specific legal approach a judge takes can really change the final number.
But what if the situation gets even more complex? What if it's not just you and one other driver? Imagine a big multi-car pileup where several different people are all at fault. How do you sort that mess out?
Well, the law has a term for this: joint wrongdoers. This is when you have two or more people whose separate bad decisions combine to cause the same harm to you. So maybe two different drivers both negligently hit your car, causing one big combined set of injuries. Thankfully, the law has a really practical way of handling this to make sure you, the victim, actually get paid.
And this is where a really important legal protection kicks in. All the wrongdoers are considered jointly and severally liable. Now, this is a super powerful concept for the injured person. It means you can sue just one of them for the full 100% amount of your damages. You don't have to go chasing down each person to get their little piece of the pie. It's then up to the person who paid you to go and get the money back from the other people who were also at fault.
So as you can see, from figuring out the harm to predicting the future to splitting up the blame, there's a common thread running through all of it. The entire process is a search for what is just and equitable. The law is constantly trying to find that fair balance, to restore the person who was harmed as closely as money possibly can.
Which of course leaves us with one big final question, doesn't it? The law does its absolute best to calculate and compensate, to put a RAND value on a loss. But when you think about it, for things like chronic pain or trauma or losing the ability to do something you truly love, can money ever really make it right?